This week, we had two powerful reminders of how we've renewed American leadership in the world. I was proud to announce that, as promised, the rest of our troops in Iraq will come home by the end of this year. And in Libya, the death of Muammar Gaddafi showed that our role in protecting the Libyan people and helping them break free from a tyrant was the right thing to do.
Tripoli to uncover how things really stood.
A warning on the streets of Tripoli.
I want to say to Al Jazeera, wake up, because you are in dreaming. No one can kill Muammar Gaddafi. All Libyan with Muammar Gaddafi.
At the heart of the criticism, reports that Gaddafi's warplanes bombed and killed dozens of protesters in the capital city.
Future of Libya appears to be on a knife edge. Fighter jets have been bombarding the capital, Tripoli, reportedly on the orders of leader Muammar Gaddafi.
Later on, they told us that Tripoli is bombed by Air Force and heavy guns or something like that. And completely it's not true.
The truth seems more to be a city going about its everyday business. These are hardly the pictures of a city on the brink of war.
Meanwhile, Libya's capital Tripoli is bracing for what could be another night of gunfire, explosions and fighting. Eyewitnesses say warplanes had been firing at opposition supporters from the air.
When we invited the foreign media to come to Tripoli and to Libya and to see and to watch and to send their reports to their channels, we noticed that the administration or management of their channels selected what they want from these reports and eliminate or delete what does not serve their purposes.
Which is why people here are angry. Mohammed's taken a few days off from his work as an engineer to join the throngs of Gaddafi supporters in downtown Green Square.
They're hiding this. What's going on now, okay? All the people are here, just to be supportive for our leader, Muammar Gaddafi, okay? And they want to hide this.
But, say analysts, it's not just what's being hidden, it's also what's actually being said.
What we're getting is a pro-U.S., pro-Pentagon, one-sided picture of a situation which fills the media with the idea that there's freedom fighters involved in Libya and that there's a government regime that's been an atrocious terrorist government since 1970, roughly. This is nonsense.
Here, the Jazeera, you say I'm not in Tripoli, maybe I'm in Afghanistan, maybe I'm in Iraq.
The war is clearly not in Tripoli. And just as clearly, Western media has been a little too quick to write off Gaddafi. Paula Sleer, RT, Tripoli.
And for more on this now, we are joined live from Tripoli by RT's Paula Sleer standing by. So, Paula, it seems that there is some kind of internal game going on in Libya. What else have we heard about the possible negotiations between Gaddafi and the opposition?
Well, Matt, there certainly is some kind of internal game with a lot of conflicting reports. On the one hand, we're hearing from opposition groups that Muammar Gaddafi is in talks with them. They say that he's asking for an opportunity to escape the country and that he's proposed a meeting of parliament to agree to a transition period to pave the way for him to leave. These opposition groups also saying that he wants immunity from criminal prosecution and permission to take out of the country large amounts of cash. Now, all of these reports have been rejected by Gaddafi. He has denied these kind of claims on state television. The opposition also saying that if he leaves now, they would not consider seeking prosecution through the International Court of Justice. But as I say, we're not hearing any confirmation of this. In fact, the exact opposite from the Gaddafi regime. At the same time, there's a lot of movement on the international stage. There are still discussions for a no-fly zone to be implemented. The latest word from the U.S. administration and the American President Barack Obama is that America is still considering military intervention. Now, the U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates has been caught speaking quite red-faced. I mean, he didn't realize that he was actually mic'd, and he was met at the airport in Kabul, Afghanistan, by General Petraeus, and Petraeus joked, to quote him, "Welcome back, sir, flying a little bigger plane than normal. You're going to launch some attacks on Libya or something." And to which the U.S. Defense Secretary responded by laughing and replying, "Yeah, exactly." So that certainly is something that has caught the American administration and embarrassed them. We also are hearing rumors, though, that the United States has asked Saudi Arabia to supply arms to rebels. No independent confirmation of the development of the state.
Now, just a week ago, the coverage of this story in the mainstream media suggested Gaddafi's fate was all but sealed, but what are you seeing on the ground in Tripoli?
Certainly not seeing that his fate is sealed. If anything, it seems as if the Western media was too quick to bury Gaddafi. Here in Green Square and in large parts of the capital city, wherever we go, we're flanked by people waving green flags, cheering Gaddafi's name. There is the possibility, and there certainly are rumors, that some of these supporters are being paid by the Gaddafi regime. Whether that's true or not, it cannot be denied that there certainly are large swaths for Gaddafi here in the capital city.
All right, RT's Paula Sleer live for us in Tripoli. Thanks very much for that report.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
And our resolve is clear. The people of Libya must be protected.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were two conferences on this, one in '96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested. I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro. A gold dinar would have had serious consequences for the world financial system, but may also have empowered the people of Africa, something black activists say the US wants to avoid at all costs.
The United States should welcome the self-determination of Africans. They certainly have denied self-determination to Africans inside the United States, so we're not surprised by anything that the United States would do to hinder self-determination of Africans on the continent.
The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen.
We're joined now by Yvonne De Vito, who's just come back from Libya, where you were compiling an independent dossier on what was happening on the ground there. So thank you very much for joining us. Now, you've been saying that it's because, certainly here in Italy, the news reports about what was happening in Libya were very confusing, a lot of conflicting information. So can you tell us what you saw and what you found whilst you were there?
We went to Libya on the 28th of July and we came back on the 7th of August. And we found a totally different situation because NATO was bombarding civilians. The bombings were not only carried out on military targets, but they also hit houses, hospitals, schools, television centers. And this was totally against the humanitarian reasons they said they were there for. I believe they were doing this to bring panic in the city. That's why they were bombing the things that people use daily, like places with food and essential utilities like hospitals. This was also a difficult period for Muslims because of Ramadan, and that is why in the daytime they're in their houses. We went to Tripoli and to Zitan, and we saw huge protests with thousands of pro-Gaddafi supporters turning out against NATO, and all these demonstrations were not shown in Italy. We also visited Tangier and Sansua and found a lot of women that were screaming at us, asking why you Italians are bombing us. What did we do to you? Why are you killing our children? That was the main question. We went to Zitan the same day they bombed a house, and in this house 2 children were killed. We tried to show the pictures of these children that were dead, but apart from us, no one else did the same. Except the things that we saw with our own eyes visiting these places that were bombed. We have so much material that press officers and journalists from Libya gave to us as testimony to all the dead from the NATO bombings. After all the things that we saw, we have one question. Is this a humanitarian war? Are they really helping the civilians? Because I believe that all this is because of economic reasons, or at least there are other reasons why this war happened. Petroleum or other things. We also visited Libya before, and what we found was a normal situation where people were fine. Differently from other countries that went through a revolution, Libya is considered to be the Switzerland of the African continent and is very rich, and schools are free for the people, hospitals are free for the people, and the conditions for women are much better than in other Arab countries.
Okay, now you've personally met Gaddafi yourself on a number of occasions. What do you think post-war and post-Gaddafi Libya is going to look like?
Even if all television stations are showing people fighting and demonstrating against Gaddafi, I personally saw many people demonstrating for Gaddafi. I don't know why so many journalists are not showing this, because they are manipulating the situation. Independent media show these videos on the internet because there is more freedom. From what we saw personally when we were in Libya, and from the documents we got, we saw the rebels as disorganized groups.
Are there fears amongst the people that the rebels coming to power will prove an ongoing continuation of the volatile situation there?
I believe that the rebels will not be able to do a good job after Gaddafi. Amongst them there are many extremist groups, Islamists, Tunisian people. I don't know why they are there. Al-Qaeda, rebels from Libya that just wanted a change. But there is too much disorganization to make a good job. The people we interviewed were very afraid to imagine that the rebels could take power, because they think that they are not able to govern the country or to take control in a proper way. The chiefs of these groups of rebels are ex-politicians, former politicians that before were with Gaddafi, and then they completely changed their fate. They went with the wind, as they say in Italy.
Now, there are concerns, aren't there, that amongst the rebels now there are many ex-politicians that are simply taking off their uniforms, joining the rebels and living to fight another day.
I think they are corrupt politicians, and this was also demonstrated as the chief of the rebels was killed at the order of the leader of the rebels. We've seen many times that these rebels are making criminal acts. For example, they've taken Libyan soldiers and killed them by cutting their heads off, and they take their hearts out and show them to people. So our question is, are we making allies of these people that are committing criminal acts, and can these people really govern a country?
When we talk of the NATO mission for humanitarian reasons, do you think that justification for the war in Libya stands up to scrutiny now?
I believe it's not a valid justification, because most of the targets were civilian ones, and many people say the people were targets on purpose, to create panic on the ground.
How much of a discrepancy did you see on the ground between what NATO was saying and what you were seeing?
Many discrepancies every day. The first day that NATO bombed a civilian target, I apologized to people, saying it was a mistake. But the day after, they kept bombing civilian targets. And when the Libyan government was asking why are you bombing civilians, NATO were denying it, saying it was Gaddafi propaganda. That wasn't true. We saw it.
This has been described by you as a war of disinformation. How much of that did you see on the ground?
We can see still how much the media are manipulating the situation. They say that Gaddafi's sons have been arrested, whilst this turns out to be untrue. They report that all of Tripoli has been taken over by the rebels, and this also proves untrue. A friend of ours, who is a businesswoman who lives in Tripoli, and also created a commission to make an investigation into the facts of what happened in Libya, she told me she found some journalists who were making false reports, saying that the rebels were behind them, when in fact the city behind them was empty. We saw pictures of Green Square that is completely full of rebels. But if you compare those pictures to other pictures of Green Square, it's completely different. It seems like a set was created on purpose to make the public think that all of Tripoli was taken over by the rebels, and all the Gaddafi family was dead. We think this is a NATO tactic because they want people to think that rebels have taken power, and I believe they're doing this because NATO is in a hurry to show this before the 30th of August, because they don't want to have to provide further financing for the war.
Are there fears amongst the people that the rebels coming to power will prove an ongoing continuation of the volatile situation there?
This was not a popular demonstration, but a huge military action against Gaddafi. I think after Gaddafi it will be very difficult, and NATO won't leave the National Transitional Council to govern, as they have put a lot of money into this war. So probably they will want some of that power and to be in charge. So it's just an excuse or justification that they want to help the people. They will continue to take control of the city.
You were talking about the tribes in Libya. Do you think that Western countries understand exactly what it's going to take to unite and bring democracy to Libya?
Before it was difficult to maintain the government in Libya because it's made of many tribes. It's a society made of tribes that have conflicts with each other. So it was difficult before, and I imagine now it'll be even more so.
What do you think is going to happen in Libya now?
Me and many other people that are watching Libya are afraid that it may become another Afghanistan, a country that's devastated by wars that last for years. It's a society completely different from us and our idea of democracy. They don't approve it. Their idea of government is based on groups and tribes that have their own chief. Then those chiefs together form a national council. They believe that this is the only way to represent all social groups. For example, they don't like our form of democracy, because if 60% of a country votes for one president, then the remaining 40 don't agree with the president. They believe this is not a form of democracy. This is the first time that a country was attacked, even though they asked for a commission to go into the country and to investigate and find facts. That didn't happen. They just attacked. This was started with false pictures sent by Al Jazeera through the media. Other media took these pictures and confirmed them as true, and the war was on. The most important thing is that the government said it was open to negotiations, but NATO didn't want that.
In Libya, our brave pilots and crews helped prevent a massacre, save countless lives, and give the Libyan people the chance to prevail.
Mass grave of alleged pro-Gaddafi soldiers has been discovered in a rebel-controlled area of the country, according to British newspaper The Telegraph. The location was swiftly bulldozed after the discovery, suggesting an attempt to cover up the killings. The bodies were reportedly mutilated, adding to recent concerns of human rights abuses by rebels. Such crimes are being swept under the carpet to support NATO's cause in the region, or so says Sukan Chandan, a spokesman for the British Civilians for Peace in Libya movement.
I think really fundamentally there's been a problem the way the NATO nations and their media have related to these so-called rebels. I mean, these rebels have been conducting mass lynchings of black people throughout the first several weeks and months of this crisis. And I raised this directly in press conferences, and the answer was what? Silence. It wasn't covered in the media before because this does not fit the narrative since the 1999 NATO aggression against Yugoslavia, which was we are conducting these wars not for geopolitical control and domination and monopolization of mineral wealth, but for humanitarian reasons. So how can it fit the narrative that these rebels, which NATO and the NATO countries are supporting, are lynching black people, are conducting all the atrocities they're accusing the Gaddafi side of conducting, but actually the rebels are conducting these things. So it doesn't fit the narrative at all.
Showed that our role in protecting the Libyan people.
Well, throughout the course of the 4-month-long revolution against Colonel Gaddafi's regime, Libyans have found themselves surrounded by threats. NATO forces have killed hundreds of civilians during their bombardments, this according to government claims, and rebels have been accused of committing atrocities against their own people. RT's Maria Finoshina explains.
This family hasn't had a walk, quiet and peaceful like this one, for months. They've escaped from the Libyan rebel stronghold of Benghazi to hide in this refugee camp in the west of the country after life in their native town became a nightmare.
It's not safe there anymore. It's become dangerous. And it's not only because of explosions and gunshots. One day people from the government in Benghazi, you call them rebels, we call them terrorists, came to me and told me, we have to arrest your daughter because we know that she supports Gaddafi.
Question was, Mr. Putin's question was, why are the coalition forces obviously making this effort to go after Colonel Gaddafi himself? Now, we also heard that the experts here in Brussels have confirmed that there is bombing going on by the coalition forces, which is not being covered by the media here in the European Union. Mr. Putin added that oil was a key interest for the Western powers, for the European powers who have gone into Libya, that they want to get rid of Gaddafi and install people who are more favourable to the European Union so that European companies can control the oil reserves. Let's have a listen to exactly what Mr. Putin had to say.
The coalition said destroying Gaddafi was not their goal. Then why bomb his palaces? Now some officials have claimed that eliminating him was in fact their goal. Who gave them that right? Did he have a fair trial? Returning to the no-fly zone, the bombings are destroying the country's entire infrastructure. When the so-called civilized world uses all its military power against a small country, destroying what's been created by generations, I don't know if that's good.
Nature of Gaddafi's death. The Human Rights Office is now calling for an investigation into the way he died. Also, the US are saying they would like an account. Are they just making what they seem to pretend to be the right sort of words and the right questions over his death, or do they really care?
A bit late for the United Nations Human Rights Council. In the beginnings of this war, they relied on media reports, and I hope to get onto that, the media manipulation of the war, because they should have been relying on UN fact-finding missions. The UN Human Rights Council report will no doubt be delayed, and we'll see what happens. As to what the Americans think, well, we saw what the US Secretary of State thinks about the killing of prisoners of war, and as has been said many times, at least on some channels, I've got to tell you that on the mainstream media, no one is saying that NATO and its allies wanted Gaddafi dead, want Mutassim dead, and want Saif al-Gaddafi, who we don't know where he is at the moment. They want him dead too. They don't want him talking about his deals and how he tried to turn his father's legacy.
What message, though, does this send to other leaders under pressure? I'm thinking, of course, of Assad in Syria.
I think the message is clear around the world to any dictator. Get lots of WMD. And when Gaddafi hugged Tony Blair and gave up his weapons of mass destruction, the moral is the international forces, I shouldn't say international forces because all around the world this is being viewed very differently. NATO and our allies and those under US hegemony will be saying, look, if you don't have WMD, we will contravene any international law. We will use whatever means necessary for our economic interests.
Just finally, the NTC, it's a transitional government, interim government. When do you expect to see elections conducted there in Libya under the banner of democracy?
They said 2 years. I think we're already seeing rather dangerous problems occurring in Egypt at the moment as the United States seeks to show some power there. Let's be in no doubt that the Americans and the European powers will be desperate to ensure the elections go the right way. They have form on this, of course, because they didn't allow Algeria to have free elections. So those elections, 2 years, I don't know why it takes 2 years to organize elections in Libya. I guess a country that size, the population of London, maybe it's, I don't know, postal ballots?
That's always interesting to hear your thoughts, Afshin. Afshin Rattansi, live there in London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on RT.
Gaddafi nationalized key sectors of the oil resources and negotiated fairer prices within OPEC for oil-producing countries. He used the oil revenues to build schools, universities, hospitals, and much-needed infrastructure. Before Gaddafi, fewer than 1/5 of Libyans were literate, no access to education for the majority of people, and then after Gaddafi, free quality education system, including university, and the literacy rate rose to 83%. Libya has free healthcare. All people, including the rebels, have access to doctors, hospitals, clinics, and medicines free of charge. If a Libyan needs surgery that is unavailable in Libya, funding is provided for the surgery to be carried out overseas. Soon after the revolution, basic food items were subsidized and electricity was made available throughout the country. Huge irrigation projects were established in order to support a drive towards agriculture development and self-sufficiency in food production. Gaddafi initiated the construction of the Great Man-Made River, referred to in the Guinness Book of Records as a wonder of the modern world. This gigantic river has managed to turn the coastal desert green.
In its early days, skeptics called it the Great Madman's River, a reference to the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and its enormous expense, billions of dollars.
Any Libyan who wanted to become a farmer was and still is given free use of land, a house, farm equipment, livestock, and seeds. Gaddafi vowed to house every Libyan, many of whom were still living in tents and houses made out of oil drums. He also vowed that his own parents, who lived in a tent, would not be housed until every Libyan was housed.
His mother had only one complaint. Her son insists that they remain in their tent until every Libyan is properly housed.
He fulfilled that promise, his own father dying before he had the opportunity to move him into a home. Large-scale housing construction took place right across the country, all Libyans being given a house or apartment to live in for free. Under the leadership of Gaddafi, Libya has attained the highest standard of living in Africa, rated on the UN's HDI ahead of Russia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. In 2007, in an article which appeared in the African Executive magazine, it was noted that Libya, unlike other oil-producing countries such as Nigeria, utilized the revenue from its oil to develop its country. Gaddafi believes that economic democracy can only be achieved when the GDP of a country benefits all of its citizens, and when the country's wealth is dispersed to every single citizen. Today, money from Libya's oil revenue is directly deposited into the bank account of every Libyan. Gaddafi is dedicated to the emancipation of Libyan women, encouraging them to participate in all aspects of political life. The revolution ensured that women gained full access to education and has actively encouraged acceptance of female paid employment. Libya is a very traditional society, and these moves by Gaddafi have been met with stiff resistance, especially by the forces in Benghazi. He opposed the U.S. invasion of Iraq and condemned those Arab leaders who supported the so-called coalition of the willing, earning the wrath of the Saudi monarchy when he said that the Kaaba was under the yoke of American occupation, and questioned what meaning the Hajj has for Muslims as long as the American occupation of the sacred house of God continues. In October of 2010, Gaddafi was the first and only leader in the Arab world to formally apologize for the Arab role in the trade and capture of Africans. This infuriated Arab leaders, disgruntled with the arrogance of the Arab leaders and the continual thorn in their side, as he openly criticized their hypocrisy and servitude to Western imperialism. Gaddafi became isolated in the Arab world. He called on the African Union to give representation to Africans in the U.S., Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. In a recent speech, he said, "From now on, by the will of God, I will assign teams to search, investigate, and liaise with the Africans in Europe, and to check their situations. This is my duty and role towards the sons of Africa. I am a soldier for Africa. I am here for you, and I work for you. Therefore, I will not leave you, and I will follow up on your conditions." One of Gaddafi's most controversial and difficult moves has been his determined drive to unite Africa with a shared vision for the true independence and liberation of the entire continent. He has contributed a great deal of his time, energy, and large sums of money to this project.
When war broke out in Uganda, the Congo, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, Gaddafi negotiated ceasefires, part of his long-held dream of creating a unified continent called the United States of Africa.
While the Libyan revolution has irritated the West since its inception, and although they never forgave Gaddafi for nationalizing Libya's oil, the most worrying move has been his call for the unification of Africa. After years of tireless effort on the part of Gaddafi and the Libyan revolutionary movement, the idea of a United States of Africa is gaining real momentum and support on the continent. In 1982, the World Mathaba was established in Libya. Mathaba means a gathering place for people with a common purpose. The World Mathaba brought together revolutionaries and freedom fighters from every corner of the globe to share ideas and develop their revolutionary knowledge. Many liberation groups received education, training, and support from Libya. These are just some of the groups that Gaddafi has helped, and because of his support, Gaddafi's been labeled a terrorist. Nelson Mandela called Gaddafi one of the 20th century's greatest freedom fighters and insisted the eventual collapse of the apartheid system owed much to Gaddafi and Libyan support. Mandela said that, in the darkest moments of our struggle, when our backs were to the wall, Muammar Gaddafi stood with us.